Welcome to our crash course on norm life cycle. This time, we will be using the case study of counterterrorism. We will be going through what is norm life cycle itself and its purposes, and then it will lead us into our case study so that we could all have a better understanding of how the cycle works. Finnemore and Sickink proposed the norm life cycle to explain how norms emerge and evolve within the international community. So it's a tool. Essentially, the norm life cycle is very much supported by the constructivism theory. As we know, constructivism highlights the importance and impacts of norms and beliefs in shaping the international community at large, and that it is the explanation of state behaviors. The thing is, with norms, it will constantly be changing as time goes on, and the norm life cycle acts as a tool, as I mentioned, to help explain these changes. Finnemore and Sekink believes that the processes of social construction and strategic bargaining, in terms of international cooperation, are very much intertwined. So, what is in front of you right now is the three phases found in a norm life cycle. We will be going through each and one of them, starting off with norm emergence. Norm emergence. Now, norm emergence will inevitably be involving a norm entrepreneur. Norm entrepreneur refers to whoever first initiates a new norm or a change of an existing norm. This would happen domestically, and oftentimes, when a state adopts new norms, it would come from a movement or an urgency to improve or change a part of the system within that state. And the norm entrepreneurs themselves could come in different amounts of people. It could be an individual, it could be a movement, as I mentioned, and like it could be in a group, an organization, etc. And for these entrepreneurs, the norm that they are trying to put forth would require a certain framing, and like they need to be explicit on what basis should the state adopt the norm. Why is it so important? How will they convince other people that this norm is to be applied or adopted? Now, from here, what happens is when the state where the norm emergence happens adopts the new norm, other states will take notice, and then they will start, put it into consideration for their own domestic politics. Could they benefit from this norm as well? For example, the women's suffrage movement was largely focused in the US and the UK, demanding for women's voting rights. Now, this movement, these women were the norm entrepreneurs for this norm. When the UK and the US started granting women their voting rights in the late 1800s, other states started doing the same thing. This is actually stage one of norm emergence. Eventually, more and more states adopt the norm, and the norm would then reach a tipping point or equivalent to 33.3% of the world population conforming to it. And this will signify the last stage of this, the norm emergence of this phase. And could also be seen in the norm of counterterrorism and also LGBTQ plus rights. It's up to debate whether or not LGBTQ plus rights has reached tipping point. However, yes, this is one of the more ongoing ones. Meanwhile, for counterterrorism, it has very much reached tipping point, which will be explored more in our analysis later on. So, norm cascade is the second phase in norm life cycle. At this phase, more states will start to adopt the norm. However, their motivations, it won't necessarily have to have any correlation with their own current domestic politics. Instead, it's more motivated from international pressure. It's as if they got up and went, well, every other state is doing it, why shouldn't we? However, of course, behind this notion, there is a consciousness among world leaders of not wanting to stick out, or the fear of being seen or being shamed as nonconformists by the international community. Which would lead us into the last phase in the norm life cycle, which is internalization. So at this stage, the norm becomes so globally, so universally accepted and adopted to the point, as the name implies, ingrains itself to the world and society at large and becomes something so natural that barely is ever questioned anymore. And policies are expected even to conform to the norm. So this process would also take a very long time. As it is the last part of the cycle, this is exactly where the norm is being tested. Is does it maintain itself? Which mostly it does, because again, at this point nobody will question it because it's so accepted and people understand the weight of it and how important this norm is to be adopted. And in that sense, this is where the norm life cycle not necessarily ends, but it's sort of the norm at this point will then go in a journey of internalization, of reaching more people and having more people believe in it to the point governments and countries will take a lot of consideration to this existing norm.
All right, so my name is Khalisa, and I will be talking more on the background of the counterterrorism. So if you read it, so basically, counterterrorism, in my part, discusses about how counterterrorism is originally coined as war on terror. It was used by President George W. Bush during the aftermath of the 9/11 attack on the United States. Prior to it, the phrase was not very much recognized and was only used in the US political parlance. During that global response towards the 9/11 incidents, the United Nations also played a significant role in establishing the counterterrorism system. The UN Security Council passed on resolutions such as the 1368 and the 1373, ensuring that states do not support or harbor terrorists. And during that also, as time goes on, the history of the term of counterterrorism basically was carried a lot by President Bush. And on September 20, 2001, President Bush also delivered a statement which he explicitly defined the war on terror, or what is terrorism, or what does counterterrorism does emphasize. He emphasized that the war would not end until every terrorist group had been found, stopped, and defeated. Therefore, it just campaigns as this global campaign that everything that the U.S. is trying to do is that they're trying to defeat or does not condemn any act, and are in against all terrorist groups or any terrorist activities. And the term war on terror was further solidified through various speeches and policy initiatives by President Bush. And even during 2002, in the State of the Union address, he accused other nations such as North Korea, Iran, and Iraq of supporting state sponsored terrorism and pursuing weapons of mass destruction, categorizing them as part of the axis of evil. The U.S. government in itself became like a pioneer as a strong norm pursuer, or the actor, or like the messenger of this term, where the approaches that they're trying to gain is that they are launching more financial sanctions, diplomatic efforts, and including also military action and humanitarian aid to conquer and like to help better resolve the terrorism in a sense, and emphasizing that the importance of unity and cooperation to fight against terrorism and to not condemn terrorism as a whole. And therefore the US became like this entrepreneur of norm for counterterrorism under President Bush, as it led to more global coalition against international terrorism. And the concept that was used to forward this agenda was that President Bush's leadership was marked through its initiative of freezing the terrorist financial assets, either also creating the foreign terrorist tracking task force, and also launching military operations in countries such as Afghanistan and also Iraq. And if we were to saw the next PPT, I mean, you can see that I also put like the I know I don't think it's properly seen, but two of the most important or the very imperative resolutions that was passed on was the 1368 and also the 1373, which um, it was the I think it's also the prime and the foundation that was used for the establishment or like the model module for how UN would later on work its system to kind of solidify the policies that were to be installed for other nations to also understand that the issues of terror violence and counterterrorism are something to be held upon on, and it is seriously needs to be utilized, it needs to be liberated, how also the principles are pushing for this equal rights and also self-determination to people, and also how the surrounding of anti-terrorism does for other for the recipients of this mandate and this policy. And therefore counterterrorism evolving with norm life cycle was surrounded by how it was more on preventing and combating terrorism, ensuring that states does not support this or harbor that, and ensuring a non-threatening sign to either cooperate or you're just gonna hinder the process of counterterrorism itself. And UN as a body does a lot of normative framework for the states to follow, and they establish more of their work through Security Council resolutions, and it just emphasized the importance of international cooperation, and the concept of counterterrorism just diffused globally, and it became the norm of how the United States just established this adoption of counterterrorism measures. And I say it's also served as a model for many countries and international organizations. I would say the example of I say European Union and other American states to develop their own counterterrorism framework, and also the establishment of institutionalized agent for counterterrorism that the United States also brought on was Counterterrorism Committee or CDC, or the Counterterrorism Executive Directorate, Directorate, or the CTED, where these agencies were also responsible for monitoring and implementing U.S. counterterrorism system. And throughout history, the counterterrorism continues to be refined and updated as also new threats emerge. And the United States become the prime pioneer for, I would say, most of the time. It's emphasizing the development of nations and national strategy for counterterrorism to prioritize disrupting terrorist networks and targeting key terrorists, and to also enhance intelligence sharing arrangement to better develop a new counterterrorism system to act as this savior and this very barrier protector for other nations to also follow along, and yeah, to follow and agree upon that efforts to prevent and combat terrorism are are recognized and in need for a comprehensive approach, both military and non-military measures. So that will be most of the backgrounds, and these phases of counterterrorism become deeply ingrained in international discourse and played a crucial role in reshaping global responses to the threat of terrorism. And yeah, therefore, the history of how it played upon is also mostly done by the US, and how the US just perceived this sort of narration. And yeah, it became a global recognition, and later on it became an everyday term, and it's just embedded for both any individuals and any community for to understand better on. So yeah, thank you very much. That will be all for the background section.
Okay, thank you for the previous explanation. Aliyah is taking over here. Today I will discuss the life cycle of counterterrorism norms, focusing on their emergence and cascade phases. We will explore the key actors involved, the successes and challenges faced, and the overall impact on international security policies. On this slide, I will be more focusing on norm emergence. The emergence of counterterrorism norms can be traced back to the aftermath of the September 11 attacks in 2001. In response to this unprecedented event, the United States positioned itself as a primary norm entrepreneur in the global fight against terrorism. Under the leadership of President George Walker Bush, as you can see, the US framed its response as a global war on terror. This framing significantly influenced international discourse and action, particularly within the United Nations Security Council or UNSC. This influence led the UNSC to take decisive action on counterterrorism measures, resulting in the formation of the Counterterrorism Committee or CTC. This committee played a significant role in establishing norms and standards for international cooperation against terrorism. The efforts of the US laid the foundation for a tipping point in the global counterterrorism norm. During this phase, the US effectively galvanized global attention and support for counterterrorism measures through its influential position and diplomatic efforts. One of the notable outcomes was the establishment of the CTC within the UNSC. However, despite these initial successes, criticism soon emerged. Concerns were raised about the unilateral nature of US-led initiatives and the potential human rights abuses in the implementation of counterterrorism measures. These issues question the legitimacy and effectiveness of some actions taken under counterterrorism. Okay, after getting now deeper about the norm emergence, let's talk or discuss about the norm cascade. The norm cascade phase involves the widespread adoption and internalization of counterterrorism norms by various states and international organizations. This process is driven by international pressure and incentives. During the post-emergence period, counterterrorism measures were understood as means to enhance collective capability. This period was characterized by a significant cascade, bringing the international community a multitude of modern indicators of success for policies aimed at international counterterrorism cooperation. This cascade was exemplified by the adoption of UNSC Resolution 1373, which highlighted the importance of collective action against terrorism. The resolution encouraged Security Council members and the broader international community to cooperate closely following the practices established by the United States and other leading nations. Countries like Indonesia, represented by the Indonesian National Counterterrorism Agency, or we can call it as BNPT, navigated the adoption of these norms by formulating national strategies and policies. They engaged with international partners such as the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, or UNODC, to enhance their capabilities in countering terrorism. The cascade of counterterrorism norms demonstrated a global consensus on the need for collective action against terrorism. However, challenges persisted in achieving uniform implementation and addressing the underlying socio-political factors that contribute to terrorism. Critics argue that some measures enacted in the name of counterterrorism could infringe upon civil liberties and human rights, raising ethical concerns. And I wanna highlight on specific norm. In this case, the emergence of counterterrorism norms was primarily motivated by the perceived global threat posed by terrorism, with the US playing a significant role as the norm entrepreneur. This norm was promoted based on the urgency to enhance global security and stability in response to high-profile terrorist attacks. So, in conclusion, while the emergence and cascade of counterterrorism norms have achieved significant international consensus and cooperation, they have also faced critics and challenges. These include concerns over human rights violations, uneven implementation capacities among nations, and ongoing debates over the balance between security imperatives and civil liberties. The involvement of actors like the US, UNSC, and national agencies such as BNPT illustrates the dynamics and impacts of global norms in the realm of counterterrorism, so it shapes international security policies and also practices. Thank you.
Currently, many countries incorporate counterterrorism norms in their own domestic law and policy. From this, it is processing the attempted disassembly of terrorism network, and severe punishment regarding the terrorists in each country. It is spreading the common understanding that terrorism is a serious crime and it is not justified for whatever the reason in all over the international society. And Indonesia is not exceptional about this move. The Indonesian National Counterterrorism Agency (BNPT) is a non-ministerial government agency that carries out government tasks in the field of counterterrorism. In carrying out its duties and functions, BNPT is coordinated by the Coordinating Minister for Political, Legal, and Security Affairs, and it is led by a head who is under and responsible to the President. BNPT also cooperates with some of the international organizations like the UN and some regional organizations such as ASEAN and EU. BNPT is formulating a national strategy, policy, and program in counterterrorism for protection and security of vital government infrastructures, public places, and tourist destinations. BNPT is also working to strengthen the state through training with the UN Office on Drug and Crime (UNODC) to counter the threat of foreign terrorist fighters. The NPT and UNODC have been running the Strive Juvenile Project program for 3 years, and it has achieved the targeted beyond expectations. This project has produced research, produced national trainer in psychosocial assessment, juvenile crime guideline notes in the context of counterterrorism, psychosocial assessment guidelines, and coordination guideline protection of child from the malicious network. The head of Office UNODC explained that this program contributed to provide real opportunity to recover and change child victims' lives in a non-violent way. It is hoped that this project will be sustainable and will have broader benefits in eliminating violence against children, including children associated with terrorist and violent extremist groups.
All right, we have arrived in the conclusion of all of this case study of counterterrorism. So it can be stated that the changes in the structure of counterterrorism occurred after the tragedy of September 11, 2001, where, as we all know, the US played a very significant role and it changed the dynamics, and that led to the formation of the UNSC Counterterrorism Committee, in which, of course, enjoyed wide support globally for the Counterterrorism Act. And however, the initiative led by the USA have some issues, of course, in the human rights and also imperialism and also unilateralism, in which cast doubt on the effectiveness and also the legitimacy of certain counterterrorism measures. So it's very clear mentioned before also that, of course, it's not without an issue. And of course, the counterterrorism measures derived from the norm cascade also involves number of states and also organizations, including the UNODC, and also in Indonesia itself. If we are studying about the country, the measures also it applies to the extent of application was questionable and also have ethical issues, say the same as what happened in the global initiatives started by the United States. And of course, if we go to in the internalization phase, after we know that, of course, the norm have emerged and the tipping point 33.3% and more of our populations have gained more support towards the counterterrorism issues. Of course, those will gonna be derived as a norm, and in the internalization phase, revealed that in Indonesia, BNPT or the National Terrorism Body of Indonesia also being partners by regional and also ASEAN organizations to establish effective strategies to address the problem in Indonesia, as well as counterterrorism projects on national level. And also, we have the Strive Juvenile Project in cooperation with the UNODC between the Indonesian government under the NPT under the Indonesian government. I mean, that launched the Strive Juvenile Project to provide the nonviolent recovery and rehabilitation opportunities for the children who are affected by terrorism, in which it is also being internalized to not only cope with the main problem of terrorism that have to be countered as what we know as the global war on terror, supported by the USA and also spread globally. But we can also see that um, the Strive Juvenile Project, also aiming for children who are affected by terrorism, in which also cope with some of the human rights issues that uh, also rising throughout the norm cascade, in which we have seen the global war on terror getting the place in the global norm. And again, let's review the norm life cycle in general, and I will also incorporate some of the examples that we have learned from the case of the counterterrorism that we have bring to your table from the previous part of the crash course. So remember the norm emergence. So it occurs when norm entrepreneurs. So let me get the example of the US post 9/11. Of course, they promote new norms. So norm emergence occurs when norm entrepreneurs promotes a new norm. And in this case, it's the global war on terror, and it's also influencing the global discourse and actions everywhere. All right, and then of course the norm emergence always have its challenges, and sometimes also face resistance. In which the norm emergence stage also provides the depictions of challenges that the norm entrepreneurs might also face. And of course, the tipping point, remember, more than 33.3% of the populations gain the knowledge of the norms, and they also agreed to um, adapt to the norm itself. All right, let's continue on to the norm cascade, in which is the adoption and also implementation from some of the countries or even institutions, and it's also adopting the promoted counterterrorism in this case. All right, so the counterterrorism norms, due to international pressure and also incentives promoted by the norm entrepreneurs, in this case is the USA, they force the initiatives of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, also in the UNSC level we have new institutions under it. And of course, this also incorporating many much more challenges in the norm cascade, as it is beginning to spread more rapidly and also globally. So in this case, we can also find the issues of the challenges of fully integrating the norms across different contexts, especially if we know a lot of countries have their own traditions, their own norms. So we have to incorporate the norms, the global norms that's promoted by the norm entrepreneurs, that they believe that it's right. They have to promote it, but sometimes they also face the issues, and the norm cascade also covers it. And then go again to the internalizations. Um, of course, as we all know together from the previous part of this crash course, that the norms become widely accepted and also integrated into, this is the point, domestic practices. So in this case, we take Indonesia as BNPT, or the Indonesia Bureau of Tourism, and uh, they also exemplifies this, the domestic practices, the norms being accepted and integrated into domestic practices by collaborating with the UN and also regional organizations such as ASEAN, as what I mentioned before. And of course, internalizations, we can also have it in the um, more broader scope, as we have mentioned about the structure of the project. So it's basically the norm emergence where the norm entrepreneurs promotes new norms and the norm cascade after the tipping points where there are more countries, more institutions wanted to accept the norms, and also the internalizations. We can see the internal body of each countries and also each institution accept these norms and incorporated the norms into their quote unquote daily lives. So, well, that's all from our crash course in normalized cycle. Especially, we want to highlight the case of counterterrorism, and I really hope that this crash course will give you a more broader perspectives of the normalized cycle and how to use this perspective to also analyze cases such as what we have give to you, the counterterrorism, or let's just say the global war on terror being promoted by the USA. So I think that's all from us, and I wish you a very happy studying from this crash course, and please explore more about the normal life cycle beyond what we have explained in the crash course.